Meotti was the Legalise Cannabis Party's lead candidate for the Senate in Western Australia at this federal election. He's relatively just missed out, was behind One Nation on primary votes, but have a few other established parties. So far from a poor campaign. Jason, thanks for being with us. Commiserations, of course, on the loss.
Thanks, Leo. And look, I appreciate it. I feel though overall we've had a massive win. When you consider the budget that we had here in Western Australia, and we hit 4%. That's really a milestone for the party. It entrenches us as a genuine minor party now. We're no longer just a fringe micro party. We got a really strong improvement in our vote. Overall, we were just under 20% increase in our vote from the last federal election. And I think, look, a couple of factors cost us, not the least, I think, was the appalling campaign run by the coalition, which helped bump up the Labor and the One Nation vote, unfortunately. And whilst, we probably got a little bit of that, it helped those other parties too much for me to catch, unfortunately. But, I'm happy finishing eighth, as it turns out, or the bronze, I guess, for the sixth seat. And I'm very, very excited about going again.
Right, so we're already not ruling out further campaigns, so getting in nice and early there. In terms of the result, again, look, far from a bad result, as I mentioned at the start, certainly one of, if not the stronger legalised cannabis results in the Senate nationwide. Just if you look at finishing position, but also you look at the primary vote, and again, that's not a feat that can be just kind of waved away. It was a good result in that sense. Just a bit more on kind of what stopped you at the finishing line there. Eighth, again, that's almost as close as it gets. What would you have really needed? Was it down to preference flows being a bit erratic? Where did it really come down to?
Look, if I want to be perfectly honest, it was time. Time cost us. I only had the hemp mobile for literally the last 5 days of the campaign. And if you look at my internet traffic, for example, went through the roof that last week. And I think the hemp mobile had a lot to do with it. So I sort of think, man, if I'd have had that to drive around Western Australia for, say, the last 6 weeks or the whole campaign, I would have basically been able to get around the entire state in that time. And it was just, look, it was a funding issue. It really came down to that. We put a lot of our resources into running in lower house seats. That was a choice we made, but that left us short in some other areas. But effectively, if you look at our primary votes, we hit 4% in the lower and upper house, which, like I said, that's the first, I think, for the party federally. That equates to nearly $500,000 in election funding. But of course, you only get what you spend, which is a bit of a pain, because that would be really helpful for us for next time around. But it does set a precedent that we can hit 4% on a very tight budget. I think if you work out our cost per vote, in the end, it's sort of in the 30 to 40 cents a vote area of what we spent on a campaign. And you look at, say, Trumpeter Patriots with their mass emailing and texting, they've been the thousands of dollars per vote in Western Australia. So I think with a bit more time, a bit more lead time. And of course, we had a state election literally on the doorstep of the federal election. So, that didn't help, I guess, in terms of my Senate campaign. But I think the team that we had, and I've got to shout out to Mel Darth, my number two, who backed up from a disappointing state campaign, missed out on a seat we thought she would get. She was fantastic. Fred Mulholland, our state president and campaign manager over here, was also brilliant. He managed to fill 9 lower house seats in a weekend, which was no mean feat, particularly with Section 44s and everything to navigate these days. So those two in particular, and another one's my Bullwinkle candidate, Penelope Young, who actually financed the hemp mobile to have that wrap put on it. So I'm really enthused by the response we got from the West Australian public. We ran a great campaign over here. We stayed on message, and really we've got the basis of our next federal campaign ready to go, which is the focus on hemp in particular, and ending discrimination of medicinal cannabis users in the workplace and on the road.
Yeah, so looking at the results that you were able to get, you were ahead of, you mentioned Trumpets. They're also ahead of the Nationals, who run separate in WA, and of course have a very well established brand ahead of the Christians, who had recently won a seat and had gotten some significant momentum as well. I'm interested in talking about just coming off that state campaign because when I was speaking to their well then MLC elect, now they've been sworn in, Rod Caddies and Phil Scott from One Nation, I think they were really using that state campaign as a boost for them. They had come off that. Inevitably, they've just gotten a senator as well. At the end of the day, of course, as much as you've got your own profile, you and I both know that the Senate does come down to parties at the end of the day and the party name. Surely you'd think that the state campaign might have helped and boosted the legalised cannabis vote just because they were seeing that name on their ballot, 8 weeks prior.
Well, if you actually look at the state vote to the federal vote, it's nearly 50%. It's nearly a 50% increase. The thing is, and we've gone over this, and we're still sort of debriefing because we only get a bunch of a debrief from the state campaign to go straight into the federal. But we didn't get the result we were after. We were chasing it. I'll be honest with you. We were hoping to get at least 2 seats, at the state level, and we basically just got the one with very little overflow. So I think we took some of the lessons from that and changed our message a little bit. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. And we focused on things other than, shall we say, legalising cannabis. It's in the name. We don't really need to talk to that. I feel we need to talk to the broader issues that are involved, because everyone keeps saying, a single issue, single issue. I say, well, hemp, for example, has got multiple uses here on an environmental level, on a financial level, on the jobs into the regions level, and of course there's the medicinal cannabis and all that goes with that. And that system and that really does need a clean up. It needs a really good review and to be tightened up. I think there are, like every industry that opens up with mostly self-regulation, that tends to run off the rails a bit. So look, we did get, obviously the benefit we got from the state campaign was having so many candidates ready to go. And I think that showed as we turned around and went into the federal campaign, and we ran a really disciplined campaign. We stayed on message. We've got some, we talking about the Nationals. Look, Nats won 2 seats in the Southwest in the state election, 2 months ago, and we outpolled them in Forest. We outpolled them in Forest in the lower house and the Senate. So I think, and that's sort of been a problem. I was in the National Party 30 years ago, that they never really transferred the vote from state to federal. It was always an issue that the people who would vote state for Nats would not vote for them in the federal. It's just, I don't know how you explain it, but it's sort of shown itself again that they've got quite a poor result when you think about what they had, the result they got in the state election. So look, like I said, for my own personal profile, I never really got going until October last year, and that was probably a bit late for a lot of planning and a lot of other stuff that needed to be done. But once again, look, we live and learn from this stuff. We'll certainly be starting a lot earlier to get prepared for the next election. But next cab off the rank, South Australia, and I'm really excited to be hoping to help them out in their campaign due next year.
Yeah, we'll be focusing on the SA upper house closely, mind you. There are no other state elections until then, so it's a bit quiet on that front. But we'll definitely touch on that. I'm just curious, just quickly on what you said regarding messaging it and kind of broadening it. As we both know, the name is Legalise Cannabis. Naturally, that is what is associated with the party. That is, of course, what people are really in the party for and vote for at the end of the day. Of course, you've got the joke voters. That happens with a name like that. You kind of have to embrace that. The Sex Party didn't. They got a seat with it. So where can you build off this? Yes, you've got people who are wanting it. Is there, are you able to kind of collate that pro-cannabis legalisation vote a bit more when, as I think we've discussed before, and I think we mentioned this in the Senate debate that was on 6 News, you're not the only party advocating for it. The Libertarians on your right are certainly doing it. The Greens, who have a much more resources, are also pushing it, yes, differently, but at the end of the day, legalized cannabis is still in the message. So yeah, how can you kind of collate that and build off, 4%, which is, again, for a minor party that is widely called single issue, is far from a bad statewide result?
No, if you compare it to, say, look, the new kids on the block, Australia's Voice. Now, they've got, like most of the other micro parties, less than 1%, 1% or thereabouts. It seems to be hard to break out of that range. You're sort of either less 1% or less, or you sort of get over the four, and then you get into the real game. I'm just looking at some of the preference flows. Like we got a 10% preference flow from when the Liberal was exhausted. So, and the Nats was 7.5%. So we were actually getting quite a lot of preferences from the right. And that is because it's quite a centrist issue now. It's not seen as the radical idea that it was, say, 30 years ago. It's been shown around the world that it can work. It takes the money out of the drug dealers' hands and puts it into schools and hospitals, which people these days would much rather see. Clearly, prohibition isn't going to work. And, as you say, the Greens have had the balance of power. This will be their seventh parliament in a row that they've held or could have held the balance of power in the last, so going back to 2007, I believe it is. So they've had, and it wasn't until the sixth parliament that they actually did something. What we need to look at, I think if we're going to move this forward, it's got to be done incrementally. It can't be done in like a one big, beautiful bill, shall we say. It needs to be broken up. And the simplest thing to do, and this is what I'm going to call on all the state senators in WA and all senators and parliamentarians generally, is to just amend those federal laws, the Federal Crimes Act and a couple of others, and reclassify cannabis so that the states can make the decision to legalise it. That is all they have to do. It's not the federal government can't actually legalise cannabis at the state level. All they can do is create a framework to allow the states to do it. And if that means leaving things like the International Treaty on Drugs, for example, I'm in favour of that because, quite frankly, that is the most useless UN organisation that's around. It's got an office called Drugs and Crime. Well, if that's not the most successful government department in the history of Earth, of drugs and crime, because we're rampant, the world's rampant with both of them. So I think we need to start doing things differently. They've been critical of Australia moving down the path towards decriminalisation. So I think, it's good enough for the US to jump out of the WHO. I think we can hop out of that and work with countries like Canada who have gone down this path and make it happen. But it can't be done in one big step. It just needs to be done bit by bit, allow the states the opportunity to do it. But in particular, we've got to look at hemp. We've got to get hemp out of the category of cannabis so it can be just grown as a commercial crop like every other broadacre crop we've got in this country. And with the current laws, it means that a product that has got literally no THC in it at all, which is the bast fibre and the herd that come from the hemp plant, are classified as a narcotic in this country, and you need a permit from the Office of Drug Control to export it, and that's ridiculous. So first things first, get hemp over the line, and then we can work on some of these other things. But certainly we need to move to decriminalisation nationally now as a given, I feel. And, let's see what all these other parties are doing. It hasn't been seen that anybody's had some urgency to get onto this issue until we came along, and all of a sudden now the Greens are moving on it. So look, I hope that they will, but they need to be realistic about it and actually put something forward to the parliament that will be acceptable, preferably to everybody, and make it bipartisan. That's the easiest way to deal with this issue. But I'm imagining the Liberal Party is still going to hang out there on the right and say drugs are bad and be the biggest supporters of drug dealers that the country's got, which is the conservative political parties in this country who demand that prohibition is the only way to go.
In some fairness to the Greens, they're now in a position for sole balance of power. They haven't been able to have that in previous Senates. There have been some interesting crossbench makeups, but they're now in a position where it is Labor plus Greens could actually get this done. And of course, as we both know, Labor is certainly at no risk of losing a vote in the floor of the House of Representatives at this point. So they are in that position. And look, as we've also touched on, One Nation hasn't exactly been completely opposed to moves regarding legalizing cannabis. I know Malcolm Roberts somewhat surprised me in terms of his position on it. I don't know Tyron Whitten personally. I'm not 100% sure if there's like a formal One Nation policy, but Malcolm Roberts is, of course, one of just, 3 One Nation senators, so his voice does matter there. Are you hopeful that, it could be, somewhat more bipartisan? Granted, I don't really expect the coalition to go along with it, but Labor, Greens, and a few minor parties, is that a level where it could get enough unity that at the state level you'd also see parties moving in similar ways.
Oh, look, absolutely. And look, this is so long overdue. As you know, Blair, we had cannabis decriminalisation in West Australia 20 years ago. It seems a no-brainer for me for this current state Labor government, who seems to have another 2 terms in front of them, thanks to the last state election. Two made some bold moves in this space. Move to decriminalise cannabis, just rerun the old bill because it worked fine, and an add-on to it to effectively deregulate the hemp industry and effectively take THC content out of the equation. That's what's killing it. It's requiring prison-style offences to grow hemp because of this THC. They've just got this fixation on THC, which shouldn't be there. We're talking about at best 1% content. It's negligible. If the government got realistic about this, it would open up the regions, and I would really like to see where the National Party land on hemp in particular. They were a party that supported decriminalisation 30 years ago. For some reason, they've swung right out to the right. But as you say, look, One Nation are quite open about this, and I've had a lot of conversations with One Nation, how to vote volunteers and candidates, and they're quite reasonable when you explain hemp to most people and what it can do for the environment and for the economy and so many other things. You swing people over pretty quickly. So I feel that focusing on hemp in particular, and the good that can do for so many sectors of our community, I feel it's just something that everybody should jump on board on. And look, the coalition want to stand out there on their own and wave a banner that somehow this 0% fast and herd is the threat to civilization as we know it. Well, they can hang out there, but this is one of the reasons why they've sort of had their ass handed to them by the electorate. And if they want to stay with fighting these culture wars, which this is a culture war, quite frankly, they'll stay where they are, which is basically on the margins. And they're almost a minor party now, the Liberal Party, especially here in WA. When you look at the number of seats they got state and federal now, they can have a party meeting in an ambulant toilet just about now. That's how few they've got over here. So, look, like I said, we want to talk across, and I will be very active in this space. You can guarantee it, Leos, between now and the next federal election, calling this out and getting people on board because, like I said, it's a no-brainer, hemp. And so I hope that federally and at state levels across this country, we can move forward. We can accept, that it's not about apportioning blame to the fact that what we tried didn't work, but sometimes when things don't work, you've got to try a different approach. And most people, I think, have woken up to the fact that now that this would be a much better industry, regulated, controlled and taxed, and the revenues going into our hospitals, our schools, our roads, our defence, and not into the pockets of drug dealers and corrupt officials, like that federal police officer who just got outed recently. So, there's so much money involved in it, it breeds corruption. So, it's multi-billion-dollar industry in this country alone. So, and we could be a global supplier of it too if we got our act together.